Hello and welcome to the inaugural edition of Risk and Opportunity. I'm Michael Blum, Hedgeye's president. In this conversation series, I'm going to periodically be interviewing guests to talk about subjects that are near and dear to the heart of Hedgeye Nation and our employees here at Hedgeye, as well as myself, the president of the company. Today's topic is going to be health, wellness, lifespans, and health spans. This is a topic that is of grave importance to all of us, and as I've learned in conversations at many of the conferences over the last year, to you, the members of Hedgeye Nation. The wife of one of our sector heads runs an epigenetics lab here on the East Coast at a prominent university. And of course, we have Tom Tobin, the managing director of our healthcare research team, who understands the financials of this industry like no one else. We also have Emily Evans on our team, who is the managing director of our health policy research group, and she looks at the regulatory and legal frameworks for this industry. Today, I'm pleased to welcome to our program Paul Jacobson, the CEO of Thorne, and his colleague, the Chief Scientific Officer of the company, Nathan Price. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Nice to see you.
Great to meet you.
It's actually not an accident that we're sitting here with Paul in particular. Paul and Hedgeye go back a long way. If we go back about almost a dozen years, during the first big ramp in Hedgeye's history, Paul, you were the closest advisor to Keith and myself as we were trying to find the right business footing and financial footing for the firm, which is how we met.
You guys grew quicker and larger than I think anyone expected.
That is true. And we've, of course, stayed in touch. And I think it was right around the time that we were working together back in the early 2010s that you also became involved with what is now Thorne. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the vision that you had from the get-go and how that's developed over time.
Right. So I had been the co-chair of a biotech company that was going public. And in my role, I felt before the IPO it was important to bring on someone that had more of a scientific background than I did. And the company brought in the former CEO of Sanofi to be my co-chair. And as we got to know each other over the years, I began to ask him a lot of questions and queried whether a lot of drugs that were being approved actually worked any better statistically than a lot of natural products did. And after I was letting this guy have it for many, many years, he finally said to me, "If you think you're so smart, go start a natural product company." And I asked him why, and he said, because they probably work. Nobody's ever taken the time to build the scientific approach that's necessary. And I think if somebody can do it, you might build something that's really successful, because our customers have shown us that they like natural products and they hate drugs, and they don't like the pharmaceutical industry. So that's kind of what we set out to do, was to build a company that first was devoted to hardcore science, taking a similar approach and rigor to what one might find in the biotech industry, while at the same time trying to get immediately into revenues by selling products and trying to be profitable along the way as we grew from an initial startup phase. So since that time, we've evolved really into something that's not quite understood in the public markets yet, but we are really becoming the leading preventive healthcare company with a total precision approach to it, which is not something people typically consider when they think of supplements. So our company has a number of, I think it's people with 40 advanced degrees, a lot of people, not only MDs and PhDs in various sciences, but also a number of computer scientists and informaticians or bioinformaticians. And so this team is working together to deliver the ultimate personalized health solutions with a natural approach.
And Nathan, from the reading that I've done, you are one of the leading experts, certainly in the world, on the topic of systematic biomedicine. You recently wrote a book with your colleague Leroy Hood titled The Age of Scientific Wellness. And we want to dig into this. There's really a lot of fascinating stuff in it. If you attended Hedgeye Live back in May, you got an early copy of this book, and I've gotten a number of emails from members of Hedgeye Nation as to how this has tremendously impacted them and how valuable they found the insights and facts that they were able to derive from it. But the underlying premise is that the entire healthcare industry today is set up on a set of financial incentives that really is not geared towards our wellness.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's really a challenge, because if you think about the individuals who are most entrusted with our health, the systems are set up such that they only really get paid well when we're sick. And so that becomes really a challenge. So one of the things that we address through this notion that we call scientific wellness is how might we go about interfacing in our healthcare where we're really aligned towards the individual and helping to extend their health span for as long as possible. And you can imagine how, if you get in, just to give one example, if you're thinking about something like Alzheimer's disease, once your neurons have died and you've lost billions of synapses, the notion that you could take a small molecule and regrow that is, fanciful. Like we don't know how that would happen. But if you think about something like prevention, which is to prevent the neurons from dying in the first place, it's a much, much easier challenge. And of course, this is the kind of thing that we've all known since we were small children. It's basically the story of Humpty Dumpty. So it's an easier thing to think about. How do we do prevention? And what we think about a lot in scientific wellness is how do we intervene or manage to improve health, without letting us get into those stages of later term disease, which are so hard to reverse.
One of the things that interested me in actually speaking with you, Nathan, was that I happen to like practitioners, people who like to put themselves out there and aren't afraid to fail. And you've been not just a scientist sitting in a lab doing great work, but you've also really tried to be entrepreneurial and build companies to put out products that are helpful. And not all of this has been successful, but from the book, and we're going to dig into this, and we'll talk about Alzheimer's, we're going to talk about big data and AI and how all of that plays in. But there was a company that you, I believe, started and were involved in for its duration called Aravell, if I pronounced the name correctly. And maybe you can talk a little bit about what you did there, because it really sets up this conversation for what you and your co-author, Leroy Hood, describe as P4 medicine. So maybe a good way to segment into introducing that concept to our viewers.
Sure. Yeah, so I was a co-founder of a company called aravell that I co-founded with Lee Hood and Clayton Lewis, who was our CEO. And that company was kind of a really early mover in the scientific wellness space. In retrospect, probably suffered a little bit from being so early. But the notion was that we were really interested in was, could we take a lot of data? So we would do clinical lab measures, proteomics and metabolomics and genomics. And, so you're measuring thousands of things about people and generating data such that you could give precise recommendations about what they should do. And as this developed, then, we did aim this, as you mentioned, the concept of P4, which is medicine that is personalized to the individual, predictive about what's going to happen, preventive, right? You want to be able to stop things, and participatory, making people really at the centerpiece of all that. It was heavily based around also health coaching and people that had, interfaces around that. And so aravell led to a tremendous amount of learning in terms of scientific discovery. We probably published about 25 high impact papers off of the data that was learned from that. And it was also a learning experience from the standpoint of trying to figure out a business model that would work, which we never really got right in aravell, and also the timing. But some of the things that have come out of that I think so interesting as we think about Thorne in particular are lessons that we've learned and ways that we've been able to build economic models that that are working for us, and also how much further the science has advanced. Someone was mentioning to me the other day, that they missed aravell, and they really wish that they could get insights like that on their microbiome. And I think I responded back, well, you should do Thorne's microbiome test because it's about 100 times better than what we had at Aravell, because we're so much further along. And the science that, because we're about, 5 years further down the road, and the science around the microbiome has moved so quickly that we're now really able to say so many more things definitively than what we could even a small time ago. So there is a sense of evolution and improvement in these kind of systems, and also just kind of where the whole world is coming together, and the moment for a more wellness focused efforts in healthcare have really come to the fore, and are so much more prominent now than when we started this whole thing a decade ago, when it was almost people were almost angry about you bringing it up, or it was kind of considered a topic that wasn't serious, and now it really is.
And I think the practical lesson for us as humans who want to ultimately live healthy and live longer is that by the time I feel sick and I go see my healthcare provider, I'm potentially years, if not even a decade or more, too late, right? Because I think what you're finding, or what you did find in this process, is that sort of the earliest markers of when your body moves from being perfectly healthy to, I think you call it transition, and then the initial progression of the disease, that today, by our current form of medicine, the way the whole thing is set up, it goes completely undetected.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because the way that we've set up medicine, and it really has its roots in the previous century, right, with Abraham Flexner and this whole work of bringing science into medicine. But when that started, the big killers in our country were infectious diseases. Right? Pneumonia was a big killer. And so you had all these, there's this terrible, morbid statistic, but every third coffin was filled with the body of a child who had died from infectious disease. So we got into this mode of, find this causal agent, which in this case was the pathogen, the bacteria or the virus, and then go in and kill it. And that worked tremendously well. If we look at the things that we die of now, they're radically different than they were in the early 1900s. So medicine was incredibly successful on that front. The problem now is that when we look at chronic disease, which is our major issues, that this approach, that this find it and fix it kind of approach, when we map that into chronic disease, became find the target, drug it, and that has not worked for us so terribly well. And so it's led to a system that's really based mostly around some sort of acute symptom, right? Something is bad, you have the symptoms for that, you go in and you get given a drug. And that has its uses, obviously. But for the most part, what it leaves out is a really deep focus around wellness and prevention, in the sense of how you can dive in and understand signals that are coming at a molecular level much before you start having real problems that are affecting your life. And so that gets us into a whole new world, and it's a world that we're prepared for now, because it requires lots of data, and it requires computation and AIs to sort out signal from noise. But it's leveraging on all these exponentially growing technologies that we've had for the last several decades that let us think about a reimagining of medicine in a way that we can think about prevention in a precise way, just like we went through the precision medicine revolutions of the last, over the last 20 years.
I also think it's going to require a bit of change in the legal system, because right now, the way lawyers are targeting physicians, it's causing physicians to oftentimes prescribe according to what they determine as standard of care, whether it's actually the best thing for the patient or not. And it's causing a lot of physicians to either they don't know anything about a natural approach or a lifestyle approach, which could be tried first, or they don't want to take the risk because the potential lawsuits hanging out there. But one of the things it has spawned now is a thriving functional medicine business, where you have doctors that try to go where the data lies, and they usually tend to avoid drugs with complicated and difficult side effects as the first intervention, and they'll try something else first for safety and because they're beginning to learn more about how natural products actually work.
You go into the details of this in the book. We don't have to rehash it necessarily here, but fundamentally speaking, the economy and financials that have been built around this find it, fix it ecosystem, they're just staggering. I mean, we're talking about trillions that are at stake here, right?
Yeah, the economics there are, there's no other word for it besides staggering. I feel exactly the same way, because if you look at the rise of healthcare costs, certainly, in the United States, it's been going up over inflation for something like 40 years. And so it just continues to eat up more and more of our GDP. We're all familiar with the fact that it's over 1/6 of GDP now and trending towards 1/5. And it becomes very unsustainable. And the problem with that, and you could even argue that that would be okay if our outcomes were going up at that same kind of rate. But we're actually not getting commensurately better. In fact, they've done economic analyses, and it was pretty stunning. If you look at something like the tech industry, it's getting more efficient and cheaper year over year, and very quickly so, on an exponential curve, as we know. But even if you look at much older industries, for example, if you look at something like farming, it has had a rate where it's improving, its efficiency and costs are going down. And there's one massive outlier when they've done these analyses across all these different industries, which is healthcare, which over the last 2 decades has gotten less efficient and more expensive. And if you think about that, it's such an outlier in our technological age. And there are many reasons and drivers for that. But part of it is the way that it is structured and the misalignment of financial incentives and health of a person. Those things are sometimes kind of aligned, and sometimes they're very much at odds. And so we have this labyrinthian complexity that we have that enforces a lot of decision making that is suboptimal from a population standpoint. And so it's a huge challenge. And moving it is an even bigger challenge, because you're talking about something that is, again, nearly 1/5 of the economy. So it doesn't turn on a dime, that's for sure.
There's a chart that you show in the book which takes the top 10 drugs by revenue in the country, and it shows their efficacy. And I'm laughing because I remember you write in the book how you presented this data a couple years ago at a conference. And it had been published and peer-reviewed, and there were attendees at the conference who basically just claimed you made it up, because it is so absurd, actually, what is being shown there.
It is, and it's published in Nature, which is arguably the best science journal in the world. So it was not made up, and it was this was work that came out of Nick Short's work at UCSD, and it shows a remarkable pattern, which is that for the top 10 selling drugs in the United States, when you look at number needed to treat, you're talking about, to get a positive outcome, between 1 in 25 for the worst performing and 1 in 4 for the best performing. This is the era of imprecision medicine, as we often call it, because you need to be able to get much better at getting the right treatment to the right person. And then in the age of scientific wellness, and what we're doing with Thorne is we're pushing, even beyond that notion of just thinking about precision medicine, which is a flip from not even just trying to be precise with the drugs we have for late stage intervention, but how do you think about intervening earlier when it's much cheaper, much more effective, much more likely to give a person an outcome that they really want, so that you can have a really meaningful effect on their lifetime of health, which of course affects your whole life.
And I think this leads us to the topic of aging healthily. A couple of summers ago, Josh Steiner, our financials, macro, and housing sector head, had on his summer reading list a book by David Sinclair called Lifespan, which I think was on the New York Times bestseller list. I read it, and that was one of my first forays into this general topic. And you guys go about, I think, what you're trying to achieve quite differently, where David's kind of really looking at age reversal, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I think the fundamental argument is the same. We are all living longer, and we are finding ways for our bodies to remain active and healthy longer. But the problem is, if we live to 100, but the last 20 years we live in dementia and don't understand what's going on around us, that's a pretty terrible outcome as we become essentially imprisoned in our own body. And so I think that this topic of healthy aging is one that's really central to what it is you are looking at focusing on.
Yeah, so it's healthy aging, and that is the way that we tend to characterize it, is the focus of basically everything that we're doing. And I love the fact that you referred to dementia in particular. So one of the big focal areas that we have is around brain health and the prevention of dementias, because that is an area where exactly it's no point to live beyond 100 if your brain's not coming along with you. And in fact, for many of us, our brains will deteriorate significantly before that. So one of the major efforts that we've carried out over the last couple of years has been to build a really detailed physiologic model of how the brain maintains health. And as you look at that, and then you start layering on the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And I was a federally funded Alzheimer's researcher for about 10 years before coming to Thorne, amongst other things. But when you start doing that, what you find is that you can explain a lot of the observations that are out there, and you can build a personalized model that, given data from blood, genetics, and a cognitive test, you can then forecast the likely age at which a person might be diagnosed with dementia. There are error bars and probabilities associated with that. But most importantly, you can develop personalized plans that of how much of a responder you think people will be to different combinations of interventions. And then you can forecast for them how much benefit would be expected through all these kind of things. And what we found is that there are many natural products that have known mechanisms and have a big effect on the outcomes in dementia. Lifestyle, exercise, keeping oxygenation to your brain turns out to be super important, and so forth. We could go down this in a lot of detail. But the whole point here is that it's now possible to think about things with a little bit of a different paradigm, where you can build these complex models of how the brain maintains health. We've simulated now 10 million what are called digital twins. These are replicas of patients, and you can evaluate the properties of interventions in those cohorts in advance. And it has really important implications for how we think about things like insurance in the future, how we think about personalized healthcare that's centered on prevention, and how individuals can also gain more and more ability to control and have some sense of understanding the choices that they're making in their own health and how those play out over time. So we think it's a super important area.
And I think the argument that you're making is that the context of this information can actually help us make better choices, right? I know that it would be better for me if I worked out more, ate less pasta, drank less wine. The reality of the matter is I enjoy all those things, and I don't have enough of a motivator maybe to do what would be more healthy for me. But with the continuous monitoring and all the digital information gathering devices that we have at our disposal today, but then someone like yourselves pulling together all of this information and having real statistical data that I can visualize and see, and making better decisions is actually a better motivator than once a year going to your healthcare provider for a physical and him telling you, hey, you should work out more.
Yeah, it really helps. It helps a lot with those kind of things. And there's also the notion of, look, we're all going to live our lives, and we should. Like, I'm not one of those people that thinks, that life is all about trying to just optimize the end number. And so, you want to be able to enjoy those things. But for example, if you're going to, if what you're going to do involves something, like a pasta, right? You're going to have something that's more sugary. It's good to know that, you can get less downside from that if you ingest some fiber right before. You can, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that, with different products or foods. And you can think about how to optimize. Other things that come out of this kind of analysis or of the work is you can find out from genetics what you're most susceptible to and what you're most robust against. Right? Some things that are general in lifestyle and so forth, you might be pretty robust to them and they're not going to cause you much problems. Whereas some other things, may cause you a really big problem. I can give one example. So if you have certain bacteria in your gut, they'll have a tendency to eat something like L-carnitine, which you find in red meat. They turn it into something called trimethylamine, which your liver turns into TMAO. It's a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. But if you don't have those bacteria in your gut, that doesn't happen. So, that's a link. So if you want to sever that link, you can do that with, a targeted approach to modifying your microbiome in such a way rather than, the lifestyle intervention. Now, the lifestyle affects more than that, so I don't want to carry that too far. But just to give an example, there's all kinds of ways that we can think about, optimizing our own physiology to achieve the aims that we have. And in some of those cases, we might be able to help, mitigate against, the kinds of things, or help you keep doing some of the kind of things that you'd like to do.
And one of the things we found, Michael, in all this is that you cannot get people to affect significant behavioral change, at least if you want to build a business around what we're doing. So we have to be targeted with the information. We can't overburden people with things. And you certainly have to be mindful of the whole behavioral change thing. It's why a lot of the wearable stuff has problems, because people just don't pay attention to it.
Well, this is, Paul, where I actually think that wellness and finance actually intersects, right? A lot of people just think they can outsource the preservation of their hard-earned capital to a wealth manager who will do the right thing without understanding the conflicts within the industry, et cetera, and they just hope for the best. And Hedgeye customers typically have a different approach. They want to be educated. At a bare minimum, they want to be able to ask the tough questions, and in many cases, they want to take over the management of their net worth themselves as well. To me, health is really no different. If I choose once a year to go and have my physical and outsource all the decision making to my healthcare provider at that point in time, and then hope for the best over the course of the next 12 months, the outcome is the society that we have today, versus taking an ownership in these things and understanding that you can measure various parameters of your health and find consultants and people to help you really get better at maintaining your wellness. It's fundamentally the same shift that has to happen in people's heads, and in order for that to exist, there have to be companies like Hedgeye or Thorne and others to help people along that path.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention it, because I actually think we've been thinking about down the road, our industry is not covered by insurance. I mean, there's a little tweak here and there, but generally it's not. And we've been thinking that there's at some point here, when we have the time, there's a marrying of fintech with what we're doing to create at least products for individuals that could really help them manage the risks throughout their lives and try to live healthier for longer. And, it's just been a time issue for us, but I'm hoping sometime next year, as Nathan builds out more of the platform, along with some of our other engineers, that we have the time to start focusing on this, and we can attract somebody that's interested in building a financial services around a health tech product that, Nathan, he touches on it in his book, but we don't think the insurance industry is necessarily structured the right way either. It's not just the medical system.
Well, I'll venture a healthy guess here that we have a lot of people on Hedgeye's team who might have some good input and would be quite eager to help you guys on that path.
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's a couple of guys that I was looking on your website and saw a couple of people who have already contacted us. I guess they've read Nathan's book, and so we're having some meetings with a few of them. I don't know what they want to talk about, but it definitely came from you guys.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And I believe, Nathan, you guys maybe brought an example of a digital twin?
Yes. Yeah, so we have a visual to show if people are interested in this.
This won't be the live model. It'd be too hard to run, right? So you're going to just show a few screens. Okay.
Yeah, and so basically what it shows is that you can take data from an individual, and in this case, it's scaled down to what we think would be a reasonable kind of thing from an affordability standpoint. But what's shown is a man, in this case, a 50-year-old has 2 copies of ApoE, which is a gene that gives higher risk, or a gene variant that gives higher risk for Alzheimer's disease. Someone who's sleeping poorly, they have low vitamin D in this case, their uptake of vitamin D and so forth is shown. See, we've started the video now, but anyway, what you can do is that you can give a prediction of the age at which this person's likely to get a dementia, and you can show a probability map. And then there on the right side near the bottom, what it's showing is the notion of interventions, what percentile of a responder you are, and how much benefit you can get. And one of the really interesting things that comes out of the digital twins is that very often a single intervention has a very small effect, or even no noticeable effect. But when you start doing the right combination on individuals, you start to see that they get benefits of 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, and you start to be able to push that brain health out further and further, so that you can stay at your peak cognition much later in your life. And these interventions tend to be relatively inexpensive. So they're not, these are not drugs that cost you $28,000 a year. These are exercise and sleep and supplements, which will, that are much less expensive than that. And so what we show then is an ability to get a return for people on how much they want to invest in their own health, and you can do it in really specific ways. So I want that notion of the combination is really important. And one way to just think about that, I think, makes it very intuitive. Like, imagine you have a clock and you've got 4 broken gears. If you take out a broken gear and you replace it with a good gear, you would find that the clock still doesn't work. If you replace the broken gear and then you pull out another broken gear, you replace it, it doesn't work. You have to fix the system. And in medicine, it's very much the same way. So when we run, when we look at a lot of the trials that we set up that's around one compound, what you'll find is that the effect size there, you have to get lucky. You have to do these really large studies, because you have to you kind of by random chance, you're just waiting to see enough people where that happens to be the one last issue. What we're finding is that you can be much, much more efficient by looking deeply at a person's biology, simulating it with the digital twin, and then solving the 3 or 4 or 5 issues. And we actually find that we saturated around 4. So that tends to be about the number, differs from person to person. But basically, if you do a handful of things, you end up getting a much better response. And so that deep personalization gives you a higher effect size, which lets you do smaller end trials. And we think that's really important because it makes the economics around all of this work much, much better, because you can get more definitive answers around personalization from lower numbers of individuals that you have to test.
And to be clear, I think Paul alluded to it here at the very beginning of the video, but this is really based on a massive amount of data, right? If you were to create a digital twin of me, you'd have sequenced my genome, you would have some deep phenotyping, meaning blood draws over probably some extended period of time. You'd have data from one or more wearables that truly measures, how much I sleep, how much I work out, what my stress levels are, et cetera, not just a self-reporting type thing. All of this is then crunched through a big data machine and artificial intelligence. And I think it relies also on historical data that you have, in part from those patients that you had over the course of almost 20 years at Aravell, right?
Yes. And so the really remarkable thing about the way that we can do the digital twin models is we can actually take as much or as little data as is available on a per person basis. So it's actually very flexible. Like, we look at this across a healthcare system, because what we do in the digital twin is, if we don't have the data on you, then you can infer basically the population average given what we do know about you. So if all we know about you is your sex and your age and a few blood markers, the rest will be filled in based on the most likely prediction given those things that we know. But to your point, if we have your genome and lots of blood measures, and we have your health history and et cetera, we can take all of that information, and what it does is it just makes the predictions more and more refined, makes them increasingly more accurate and more actionable. And so what we've designed then is a framework that is really attunable to different levels of how deeply people want to go into their own biology. And that I think is really important, because it's not only the super users that are going to measure everything that can get value out of this. Even if people do lower numbers of measures, they won't get as much value, but they can still get a lot of value.
And another component of this is biological age, which may quite differ from the absolute age that you are, based on the number of years that have elapsed since your birth. And I believe you guys at Thorne, through the work that you've done, Nathan, have developed a test for that as well, that you guys are, I think, quite proud of because of the economics of that. But can you talk a little bit about the biological age component to this wellness discussion as well?
Yes. So biological age is, I think, a very useful metric. One of the reasons I like it is it's just very intuitive for people to understand. You might not remember if, having a hemoglobin A1C of 6.2% is a good number or not. But it's easy to get your mind wrapped around, okay, if my biological age is lower than my chronologic age, I'm on a better trajectory. So I like it from that standpoint of being intuitive. Now, there's many ways you can go about measuring a biological age. The way that we decided to do it at Thorne is it's based around about 40 different clinical lab measurements out of the blood. The reason we chose to do that, there's a few reasons. The first is that if you look at the main thing that you want to get out of biological age, which is that the difference between your biological age and your chronologic age, does that tell you something that's important to your health? And biological age based around these clinical labs today is the most correlated with health outcomes. So if you have a lower biological age, by these kind of metrics, then yes, you're less likely to have a heart attack in the future, or you're less likely to have a stroke, or whatever the outcome might be. Second reason we do it this way is that the clinical labs are well understood. So it means that you don't just get a number, you get a plan of action. So if your biological age is being driven by high hemoglobin A1C, then that relates back to diabetes and metabolic health. If it's being driven by DHEA, that relates to hormone health. So and then there are interventions and a plan that you can go about doing that. And it is very cost effective. We're able to do the biological age test for under $100 and give that back to people. So those were the reasons that we decided to do it the way that we did.
I remember being at a tech conference in Laguna Beach well over a decade ago, and there was a guy there by the name of Larry Smarr, and he was talking about the quantified self, or the quantifiable self. He actually is mentioned in your book as well. I listened to his talk. I thought the guy was completely nuts, but really everything that you're talking about today, he in a very rudimentary form was trying on himself way back when, doing monthly blood draws, charting all this stuff out, trying to find correlations. And he was doing this initially manually and then in Excel. And today we have machine learning and big data and AI and all these things coming together to, on the basis of a much more broad data set, larger population sets, do this. And it's statistically extremely valid information, which is the fascinating thing about this discussion.
Yeah, and Larry, it's great you brought up Larry, because Larry had the advantage too that he ran the San Diego Supercomputing Center. And so I remember when I visited Larry a few years ago, and he's got this huge projection system. It's 2 stories high, and the length of, maybe I'm exaggerating in my mind, half the length of a football field or something, but with just projections of all the data out of his body, and you walk through it all with him, and he's got 3-dimensional, printed replicas of his diseased colon that he fixed, and and all these kind of things. So Larry was definitely an inspiration for us when we started the Pioneer 100 project. And Larry was actually one of the Pioneer 100. He's been public, so I can say that. And, and he came into Aravell. He was an advisor for us. Larry was, one of the very first, along with Mike Snyder at Stanford, kind of the first 2 big, highly quantified self people that put it all out in the public. So kudos to him. It was great to work with him.
Good, and I don't think I can close a healthcare or wellness discussion without bringing up cancer, which is, of course, the disease that through media and the fact that almost every one of us, through a family member or a friend or neighbor, have been touched by it. I think I take away from your book that we're really on the precipice of being able to identify in a simple blood sample precursors to cancer way before it would otherwise be clinically indicated. And that has tremendous implications, I think, as well.
It definitely does. And certainly companies like Grail with their Galleri test and so forth are making really big strides in this. And cancer is one of those that, and I actually don't even like to use the word cancer. I think we should basically always talk about cancers in the plural, because they're so different, right? Everyone's cancer is so different from anyone else's cancer. And so cancers are a major fear for most people for obvious reasons. And the notion that we can actually get at these much earlier now is very promising. And I think the work of scientific wellness is really going to help us with that, because it gives us deep data on people while they're healthy, which lets you fill in a lot more of that information about what's happening before you get that diagnosis. So we want to dive into that very deeply. And the other aspect that I think is so important is the development of immunotherapies, because we've gone from a world in which we have these kind of really barbaric approaches like chemotherapy and radiation, which are they help to keep there's a benefit to patients, but it's really a tough road, and it's not an ideal solution by any means. But with these immunotherapies, you're really harnessing the wisdom and the systems in your body in a way that I think is fantastic, because all of us have cancers all the time, but they get picked up by our immune system and those cells get shut down, and so they don't become a tumor or something like that. And so when we get into the cases, it means that our immune system missed something. So I really think it's this match. In fact, when I was at ISB, we got a $25 million grant from the CARE Foundation on this topic. But basically it was, where we fused together these deep, dense data clouds from scientific wellness. So you're looking at prevention, and then tie that in with some of these advanced therapeutic approaches that people are building around immunotherapy. And you have something that has real promise to work. The problem right now is that kind of approach is too expensive. But I'd much rather be in a world where we're trying to figure out how to take, a sophisticated approach and make it cheaper than the old world where we used to just really not know, how to deal with these things. And so those therapies only work for a small fraction of cancers today. But that whole community is trying to expand that out. So early detection is super important, and then tying it with these approaches where you can actually clean out those cells from that state is very promising. I think that I think we've turned a corner in cancer research and in therapy, and I'm excited to see what the future is going to bring on that front.
Good. Paul, I can't close without asking you a couple more Thorne-related questions here. As a consumer of supplements, and my wife in particular being a shopper for them, I am always concerned with how do I identify a good provider of supplements. And I think today was great because people got to see a lot of things that happen at Thorne underneath the hood from a deep science perspective that leads to the supplements that you guys put out. I think Amazon recently removed a slew of entire classes of supplements because there was so much fake stuff being peddled. How do I, as a consumer, know that what I'm buying is actually what it purports to be? And how do I measure quality in this industry?
Right. I think it's tough, and you almost have to go by reputation. So I'll kind of tell you what we do. When we started, we knew there was a high degree of skepticism. So manufacturing and controlling where all the raw materials come from is really critical. So I would, first of all, look for companies that do a lot of, if not all, of their own manufacturing, and preferably in the United States, where quality control demands are a lot higher. And people think we're not regulated, but we are regulated from a manufacturing standpoint, and we're big enough where the FDA surprises us on an annual basis to come in and audit the plant. The second thing is how much testing goes on. So we run significant, probably one of the largest in-house labs to test all the raw materials at the beginning, and then to test the products to make sure that what we say in terms of a label claim is actually true when the product goes out the door. Thorne is also NSF for Sport certified. So what that means, at least on a lot of our products that athletes use. So we are sold in the locker room of every professional sports team in the United States. The products are audited inside the plant, and then we have to send the finished good to NSF, which is the National Safety Foundation, so they can batch test each one of the products that we sell to athletes. So they are virtually 100% guaranteed never to be popped for a positive dope test. We then save retained samples for 10 years to make sure that if an athlete does test positive, it didn't come from one of our products. We also maintain a significant database around adverse events. So a lot of the United States supplement industry is required to report adverse events to the FDA. We keep that data for going back at least 10 years. We retain samples for that period. And then we use a company called Safety Call International to monitor adverse events and report everything to the FDA for us. I mean, we know the safety record of everything that we've made and sold, and I can tell you that it's far, far safer than food itself. And then I would say that you look to companies that actually do research. So our primary research partner is the Mayo Clinic. We decided that it would be important to get the biggest skeptic of all. So we have been running clinical trials at Mayo. You'll see their logos on some of our research work as we build content about health and wellness together with some of the physician teams. And we run complicated clinical trials with them on areas such as concussion, how to treat women pre and post chemo and radiation for breast cancer. We're running an anti-anxietal natural product, nursing population at Mayo. So, the typical things that you would think of when you are looking for a company that's committed vertically across everything that they do is what we're doing. But I think manufacturing in the United States and buying raw materials, at least trying to stay as much as you can away from China in terms of acquisition of raw materials, or if you're going to buy there, you better be auditing those folks and know what you're getting.
Well, that's another topic that's near and dear to my heart, and our Risk and Opportunity series is going to definitely dig into the topic of China quite regularly as we continue to host these conversations. Paul, I'd like to thank you and your team for the support of Hedgeye, specifically Hedgeye Live. As I said, I know that the folks in Hedgeye Nation who attended that and got a copy of the book really appreciated that and learned a lot, and I think they're on the same journey that I'm on and that we're all on to lead lives that are more driven by wellness and less driven by sickness. And there's so many tools that are on offer now that we're learning about, and thanks so much. And thanks for the great book, Nathan, that you and Lee wrote here. If you haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, The Age of Scientific Wellness is well worth the read here this summer. And wanted to thank you guys for your time this afternoon as well.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you,
Take
Michael.
care.
Thank you very much for tuning in. Really appreciate your time sharing it with me, and a topic that's near and dear to the heart of many of us here in Hedgeye Nation, wellness, healthcare, and how that is impacting the healthcare industry and our lives. Hopefully we can all stay healthy and live long and enjoyable lives with each other, with our families and loved ones. Thank you very much, and see you again next time.